Guns don't kill people. People kill people. It's not equipment that wins, it's the spirit. The history of the Russian-Ukrainian war knows many examples of a seemingly illogical course in a battle. And the fact that a small squad can be more effective than a whole battalion is no surprise at all. The enormous potential of modern weapons can only be revealed in the right hands. A great many factors influence the effectiveness of soldiers, from the atmosphere in the information field to living conditions. The difference between winning and losing often lies in the ability to establish teamwork and mutual support. However, the most important thing is motivation, the desire to win. This is the 39th episode of the series about the ATO, History of War. In 2014, the Russian Federation committed an act of armed aggression against Ukraine. Hot on the heels of this war, we study its course, tracing the links between military operations, diplomacy, politics, and economics. We're trying to understand how it all happened, and most importantly, why. When covering a certain battle, historians and journalists often make the same mistake. You can't analyze a battle without taking the entire strategic picture into consideration. In the case of the Russian-Ukrainian war, the end of January 2015 is remembered for the fierce battles for Donetsk airport. At the same time, the beginning of fighting for Debaltseve undeservedly ends up in the shadow. Donetsk airport fell on January 21, 2015. The last 16 defenders of the terminal were captured, their fate far from enviable. The victory of the so-called militia was savored in every way possible in the Russian news, but while covering the fighting for a several square kilometer plot of land, their journalists were completely silent about the beginning of the Russian offensive in the area of Debaltseve. The phrase Russian offensive is used here without any hidden context. Back in September 2014, the so-called Novorossiya army was created as part of two army corps. It's worth noting that both of those units were subordinated to the 12th Reserve Command of the Southern Military District of Russia. Its headquarters located in the city of Novocherkassk in Rostov region. These units were staffed with both local militants and regular Russian servicemen, who merged into the corps on a rotational basis as part of full-time units. Officers of the Russian army were responsible for command at all levels. There was also a Russian officer at the head of each corps, usually a general in rank. The area of responsibility of the 1st Army Corps was the territory of the DPR, the Donetsk People's Republic, and the 2nd Corps was responsible for the LPR, the Luhansk People's Republic, respectively. As of January 2015, the commanders of those formations were Major General Valery Solochuk and Lieutenant General Sergei Yudin. On January 21st, units of the 4th Motorized Rifle Brigade of the 2nd Army Corps of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation launched an offensive against the positions of the Ukrainian 128th Brigade around the village of Sanzharivka. That was the first major battle within the Debaltseve operation. The intent of the Russian command is very obvious. By delivering a blow in the direction of the village of Mironivsky, the enemy had every chance of blocking off the Debaltseve pocket in the narrowest spot. That would have led to the isolation of the entire Ukrainian group in Debaltseve and could have basically become the second Ilovaisk. History, however, has no regard for this subjunctive mood. Russian commanders made mistakes when planning the attack. Having an overwhelming numerical superiority, they probably expected an easy victory or in the outright absence of resistance. They did not carry out reconnaissance of the area of operations, so the presence of mines became a surprise for the invaders. Thick fog, which was a great nuisance for Ukrainians in the airport area, became their ally near Sanzharivka. Despite the fact that the enemy had an 8-fold advantage in manpower and 6-fold in vehicles, the garrison of the Oleksiy checkpoint took the fight. 26 Ukrainian soldiers who had never fought before in their lives managed to stop the enemy convoy, inflict damage to it, and in effect prevent the encirclement of the entire Debaltseve group. The success of the defenders of the Ukrainian positions was facilitated by the minefields, correctly placed in front of the positions, fog that prevented the enemy from coordinating the attack, and timely artillery support. As a result, they managed to destroy 2 tanks, 2 infantry fighting vehicles, several trucks, and captured 2 vehicles without damage. The enemy retreated, and there were no losses on the Ukrainian side. January 21st was reaching events. Avdiivka, which had been shelled by the militants, once again ended up without electricity and heating. In the southern direction, near Pavlopol and Sartana, Russian troops had been firing actively at Ukrainian positions, seeking to create favorable conditions for further advance westwards. The village of Novotoshkivske, near the Bakhmut highway, was being shelled by multiple launch rocket systems literally all night long, and in the neighboring village of Nizhnya, direct missile hits in residential buildings were spotted. Stanitsa Luhanska was also shelled. The activity of enemy sabotage and reconnaissance squads was also noticed there. The avalanche-like intensification of battles and shelling along the entire demarcation line only meant one thing: the flimsy truce was over, and Russia had begun the winter campaign. Back in January 20th, paratroopers of the 25th Brigade had managed to occupy the ventilation shaft of the Butivka mine at a nearby checkpoint. Trying to regain lost ground, the enemy organized a counter-strike. On the morning of January 22nd, the company's tactical group of the so-called 1st Slavic Brigade arrived in the Spartak area. The plan envisaged joint attack on the Ukrainian positions together with the Prizrak battalion. But fog once again made it all go wrong. Unfamiliar with the local area, the militants got lost. By about 9 a.m., the Russian-backed troops arrived in the area of the Ukrainian position Zenit, marching in line. That mistake cancelled out the numerical superiority of the enemy. In the close-quarters combat that followed, Ukrainian troops destroyed at least 5 armored vehicles, up to a dozen trucks, and 1 anti-tank gun. They also managed to capture several vehicles and at least 1 MT-12 anti-tank gun. It is worth noting that at the time of the battle, the head of the General Staff of Ukraine, Viktor Muzhenko, was in the zenith position, and the Russian propagandists started spreading rumors about his death. According to the results of the battle, the Russian-backed troops achieved only partial success, driving Ukrainian paratroopers away from one previously occupied position, the ventilation shaft of the Butivka mine, Zenit position, as well as the southern approaches to Avdiivka remained under the control of Ukrainian troops. That same morning, a bus stop in the Leninsky district of Donetsk was hit by mortar fire. 8 people were killed and about 20 were injured. The authorities of the DPR immediately blamed the Ukrainian side for the incident. Shortly after the shelling, they brought Ukrainian prisoners of war to the incident location, as if to show those responsible for the shelling to the people. However, by the evening of the same day, the arrest of the sabotage group involved in the shelling was reported. All 3 of them were citizens of Russia. During an investigation, experts from the OSCE only stated that the bus stop was fired upon from the northwest. However, analyzing the size of the craters, they made an assumption about the caliber and accordingly the firing range of the mortar used in the shelling. According to those calculations, the mortar was located on the territory controlled by the militants. The Russian-backed troops themselves later confirmed the theory. As it turned out, the shelling of the bus stop was the result of gang fights between the Cossacks and the Oplot group. On the same day, there was a battle for the village of Betmanove, formerly called Red Partisan. Not limiting themselves to the usual shelling, the Russian-supported troops attacked Ukrainian positions with the support of 3 tanks. In the end, 14 soldiers of the 93rd Brigade were taken prisoner. The militants immediately executed 5 of them just for fun. Toward the evening, Avdiivka was once again subjected to massive shelling. When shooting at Ukrainian positions from residential buildings of Donetsk and Yasinovata, the terrorists did not fear return fire, essentially using civilians as human shields. In total, Ukraine lost 23 people on January 22nd. According to various estimates, the number of killed militants on that day varies from 40 to 70 people. On January 23rd, as a result of negotiations, 3 Ukrainian soldiers were freed from captivity, and 8 bodies of defenders of Donetsk airport were taken from the militants.
Дам приказ, больше им не брать.
The so-called head of the DPR, Zakharchenko, announced a further offensive, as well as plans to advance the Russian-backed troops all the way up to the borders of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. At the same time, trying to intimidate the Ukrainian military, he said that he had forbidden the taking of prisoners. Had such an order been actually given, it would have been considered a war crime, so it didn't go further than verbal statements. On the same day, the so-called People's Mayor Yevhen Yashchenko was killed in Pervomaisk. Despite the claims made by the LNR authorities about the involvement of Ukrainian intelligence services in the murder, the reality was much more mundane. It was ordinary fighting between gangs. On January 23rd, the cities of Stanitsa Luhanska and Shastya were shelled literally all day long. The shelling with Grad multiple launch rocket systems did not even stop at night. That led to houses on 3 central streets of Shastya being damaged and the death of at least 3 local residents. The central heating manifold was also damaged with fragments. The repair crew was shelled too, with 2 workers getting injured. The repairs were unsuccessful. Due to the 15-degree cold, the central heating system froze over. The city, with a population of about 12,000 people, was left without heating. The so-called defenders of the Russian-speaking population of Donbas also distinguished themselves in the southern direction. On January 24th, on Saturday, at 9:25 a.m., Russian-supported troops launched a massive strike on the city of Mariupol using multiple launch rocket systems. The positions of the Ukrainian military were also hit, killing 1 soldier, but most of the missiles landed in the Vostochny neighborhood 10 kilometers from the front line. 6 BM-21 Grad vehicles took part in the shelling, together with several Uragan multiple launch rocket systems. Return fire destroyed 4 of the Grad vehicles. As a result of shelling, 290 objects of infrastructure were damaged, with total damages estimated as running to 100 million hryvnias. 29 civilians were killed, and more than 100 were injured. On the same day, the leader of the DPR, Zakharchenko, announced the beginning of an offensive on Mariupol. However, in view of strong international resonance after the shelling of Mariupol, he later backed away from those words. Every single international observer confirmed the shelling of the city from the territory controlled by the militants. It was a classic terrorist act. There was a woman among the killed in the shelling of Mariupol, Olha Abdurashitova. She asked Putin to send troops to Mariupol on social media. She wanted the Russian world to arrive, and so it did, and fragments from a Grad missile killed her. War is a very complex phenomenon, where valor and cowardice, theft and charity, courage and recklessness all go hand in hand. There is no place for honor and justice in a hybrid war. Printed words are as much of a weapon as tanks. Deceit and misinformation kill just as well as shells and missiles, but the main driving force is motivation. After all, whoever understands why he's taking part in a battle, the one who knows his maneuvers and understands the ultimate goal has an advantage. And he will win.